You are listening to the Jeff Rubin Show, and this episode is brought to you by Squarespace. Now, by this point, I think we all know that you can use Squarespace to create an amazing-looking website, you can make a portfolio, you can make whatever you want with it. But did you know that you can use Squarespace to sell anything? You can make it your storefront, and it'll do everything. It'll manage your inventory, process customer orders, print packing slips, and also all sorts of little wrinkles that might come up, like coupons or multiple ways to ship things. All this comes along with award-winning customer service. You got a lot of options if you want to make a terrible website. But if you want to create an exceptional website, one that stands out, one that works for everyone, including mobile devices, Squarespace is by far your easiest option. And for a limited time, if you go to squarespace.com/Jeff Rubin and enter the promo code PILEDRIVER, we're going back, a little bit of a flashback to 2 weeks ago promo code. Just bear with me, squarespace.com/Jeff Rubin, promo code PILEDRIVER. You will get a free 14-day trial and 10% off anything you might eventually purchase. So check that out. And without further ado, here's the episode. Everybody, welcome to the Jeff Rubin Show. I am Jeff Rubin, and today I am on the old Skype-a-phone with Cole Stryker. Welcome to the show, Cole.
Thanks, Jeff.
Cole has written 2 books. Cole, can you tell us about those books and what they're about?
Sure. So the first book, it's called Epic Win for Anonymous, and it deals with a group of hacktivists that call themselves Anonymous, and where they came from, what they're about, and more broadly, it deals with the memetic culture that came from, and why memes are important to the group, and what memes are, and all that stuff. The second book is more political. It deals with the value of anonymity, the political value, and the social value. And it's sort of a defense of anonymity, and it tries to express why we should fight for the ability to speak our minds anonymously online. And I go back and I trace the history of anonymity through the ages in order to make that case.
So right off the bat, we're pronouncing it meme?
Yeah, that's true. It's comes from an old Greek word which means to imitate. But yeah, it's pronounced meme.
And like meme, I know it's kind of been talked about a lot, how it has its origins in Richard Dawkins' writing, but it's kind of evolved to have a new meaning, right?
Right. I would say in the late 90s and early 2000s, it began to be co-opted by journalists referring to basically pop culture from the internet. So any sort of grassroots DIY weird internet culture started being known as internet memes. And I think, just to set up some ground rules, I think when we use the word meme today, that's probably what we're referring to. Yeah, I think so. I mean, I don't correct people when people refer to something they saw on I Can't Has Cheeseburger as a meme, when I could, technically say, oh, well, that's in the classically Dawkinsian sense, not a meme.
You would be the most popular guy at the party if you kept correcting people about that.
Limit my pedantry with these terms.
So let's go back a little to before you wrote the book. What is your history with the internet? Like, what's your earliest memory of getting online?
Oh, gosh. So I was kind of a late bloomer with the internet. The first memory, I think I was at a friend's house, and it was like 4 11 or 12-year-old boys looking up boobs.com.
And how old are you now? So what year was it then? Is what
I am 28, so this would have been, gosh, let's see, I was 11, so that would be 96, 97.
And like so many of us, pornography, the gateway to the internet.
Yeah, well, I mean, for me, it wasn't even porn. It was just like Victoria's Secret website.
Yeah. And was that via AOL?
Yeah.
I remember I had, I'm 2 years older than you, and I had Prodigy. And I remember going online with Prodigy, which was like a pre-AOL, AOL kind of. you couldn't pick your screen name. You were assigned 7 random letters and numbers, and I still remember them to this day. And out of curiosity, I Googled my Prodigy, my Prodigy name, and I found it on a list of email addresses to spam.
Oh, no. So did you find any old, like, conversations or writing that you had done?
No, I was really, really young. I have, like, memories of, like, talking about Mutagen Man from the Ninja Turtles, just talking about, like, Ninja Turtle action figures. So I must have been, like, my family, we had the internet pretty early, or we had Prodigy pretty early anyway, and we had BBS systems and that kind of thing. But I was very, very young, so I only have, like, vague recollections of it. But I do remember it kind of being in my life for as long as I can remember. Do you remember a part of your life where you weren't online, like a pre-internet existence?
Yeah, I mean, for me, getting the internet was like discovering Narnia. I mean, it's very clearly divided into pre-internet and post-internet. Like I was a bored kid. I had video games, but that was pretty strictly limited by my parents. And when I was 12, we moved out to the middle of nowhere. I had one neighbor and no friends really. The rest was cornfields. So the internet for me was like my link to the outside world.
And you're probably among the last generation of people that will remember a life before the internet, but still be able to, speak internet fluently. Like, you can talk about the internet, like you're a native, even though you remember a time before it. And people like that aren't being born anymore. It's just kind of a fact of life now.
We're like the people in 1984 that were alive before the takeover.
This is referring to
the book 1984. That remember before the regime.
I remember. So in 1984, in the book, there's people that remember what life was like before.
Yeah.
The dystopian world surrounded them.
Right. But the reverse of that.
It was a dark age in your mind.
Well, I mean, for some kids, like they probably wouldn't even notice the difference in life. But for me, it was such a dramatic difference. Just my personality and my geographic location. It was a big deal.
Why was that?
Well, it was. I mean, I got the internet right around the time that Napster started to really blow up. So just as an example.
But that's a few years later after you're searching for boobs.com.
That's true. So my family got their first computer when I was 14. So you're right. This is like 3 years later. But so I didn't have like regular internet access until like 98, 99. Mm-hmm. So yeah, Napster and, just basically discovering all this new culture that I never would have ever been exposed to other than what I might happen to catch on not even cable television. We didn't have cable. So, just being able to discover interesting bands and like the Onion was really formative, the early Onion website. And just like we had a dial-up connection and every day I would get home from school and just load up like 20 tabs and then wait for them to load, go grab a snack, and then come back in 15 minutes and they would all be loaded. And then I would read them.
And it was better that way, right?
Right. Of course, they weren't tabs in those days, just individual windows.
Yeah, inside that AOL window, you had like little windows.
Right.
What is your first memory of seeing what we now call a meme, like some piece of internet junk that you had to show your friends and you got shown by some other friend?
So when I went to college, I had instant access to broadband. So it was like a deluge of stuff. But before that, I guess Hamster Dance would have been the first thing.
Oh yeah, and that was like a page of animated GIFs of hamsters, and there was a little song, that little MIDI maybe that went in the background.
There was a little audio file of that song from Disney's Robin Hood that the rooster sings, sped up really fast.
I kind of remember. I mean, video-wise, for me, it's probably All Your Bass. All Your Bass Would Belong to Us. I watched that recently, and that thing's like, it's over a decade old now, and I was like, wow, it really still holds up.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, some of the early FARC stuff, before Reddit, before Dig, before meme culture had really taken hold, you had these little pockets of internet culture, like Something Awful and FARC, where you could go, and people would have these Photoshop contests in the thread, and that was like very fertile ground for interesting. At the time, like most people didn't have Photoshop the way everybody has a pirated copy of Photoshop now, so it was kind of limited into what you could, who could participate. Those small pockets of this subculture have exploded, and we're seeing it all over the internet now to the point where friggin' like Nike is paying people to do this for them.
Right. I'm surprised that you didn't have the internet until you were a little older, because in the books, you speak with such authority and you obviously know so much about the internet. I kind of assumed it was something that you just grew up with. You must have had a lot of catching up to do when you were 14.
I definitely did, and I also had catching up to do even while I was researching the book. Like, I guess, I mean, that's very flattering that you say I speak with authority, and I guess the explanation is that I, sought out people who were there when I wasn't there. People who were very influential on the web, like the guy who made Fark, for instance. I'm fascinated with these guys and girls. I idolize them. They kind of created the culture that I consider to be mine. These guys are like my Woodstock type crowd.
Do you remember the first time that you heard about 4chan?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was. So I was still in college around this time. It was probably 2006. And I had this buddy, and we would all constantly send each other hilarious links all the time on Instant Messenger. And this had been going on for a while. And like we would send each other links from rotten.com, which I don't know if you remember that was a...
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, there's something about being like a teenage and even college age guy specifically, I think, that like makes you want to find the grossest stuff out there. And yeah, so my friend found this weird anime photo, which is can I swear on this podcast?
You can definitely swear on this podcast.
Okay, so the image is called shitting dick nipples.
Perfect. I mean, you can describe the most grotesque imagery in vivid detail. I only wish we could show it to people too.
Well, your viewers can Google it. It's basically exactly what it sounds like. It's a manga female figure who has penises for nipples, and they themselves are defecating.
I always found that much funnier to send to people and to surprise people with than like gore or dead people. Like I always like kind of the weird, just the weird, particularly like manga and hentai. I think is always a little more surprising.
Well, for me, it's all about like just the mind-boggling nature that there is not just some person, but an entire community of people that are sincerely creating the stuff.
And it's good. Like I'm not going to Google it at the moment. I'll Google it when we're done. Maybe I probably will Google it when we're done. All right, I'll do it now. But I bet it's good art. Like these are talented artists.
Well, yeah, I mean, you can tell that like some serious thought and effort was put into it. Right. Hours of like fine tuning the lines and shading it, and you can find gigs upon gigs of this stuff now. All kinds of like weird furry photos, and especially with communities like Reddit, which are kind of tailor made to like find it, and you like harnessing the power of the crowd to dig up a lot of the weirdness. But back then, it was like if you could find something like that, it gave you some sort of social clout online. Like you were kind of this weird tastemaker.
Yeah, I'll find you 10 things weirder than that picture by the time we're done with this interview now, just like go to Google. Like you can do it on Google. You don't even you don't even need like some weird hole in the ground to find it.
That practice of finding weird stuff has blown up to be so mainstream that it's like almost hard to not find something weird.
So how did this lead? I kind of threw you off track to you discovering 4chan.
Right. So this link happened to be from 4chan. This image that my friend sent me over AOL Instant Messenger, and basically, once you see one thing from 4chan and you start poking around the site, you kind of realize like, wow, there's something interesting going on here. I mean, even me as someone who was already, for the time, pretty immersed in weird internet, because for one thing, it's odd in that none of the content stays on the site for longer than a few minutes.
So I think a lot of people, probably people that are listening to podcasts, even specifically this podcast, have heard of 4chan, but I think there's a lot of misconceptions out there, and people don't totally understand what it is. Could you try, and I know you wrote a whole book about it, but try just to succinctly describe what it is?
Yeah, sure. So 4chan is an image board, which is basically a message board that encourages or mandates that you post an image with each post. And it is a completely dynamic community in that the content is constantly moving up and down the page, so that the stuff that's getting replied to is sort of floating to the top of the page. Basically in the same way that Reddit works, where you have upvotes dictating how long content stays on the front page. On 4chan, it's just replies. So the more chatter that's happening around a specific post, the longer it's going to hang around. And even that, and everything dies after a few hours. So it's this constant churn of people trying to gross each other out, shock each other, make each other laugh. It's I don't think it's a conservative estimate to say that it's probably 85 to 90% young males that are hanging out there.
And how many people just total? Like how many people go to 4chan every month?
I haven't looked at the numbers in a while, but around the time the book came out, and this was 2 years ago, or no, like a year and a half ago. It was at like 12.5 million monthly.
So that's a lot.
I think it's safe to call it something approaching mainstream culture at this point.
What was your reaction the first time you saw 4chan?
Well, I was confused at first. I didn't like it. It's kind of, there's no documentation really. There's an FAQ, but you can't just jump right in. You kind of have to. There's this meme on 4chan that says lurk more, meaning before you start posting, you should hang out and kind of understand the manners and mores of the community. So I lurked, and I just sort of watched threads blow up, and I watched threads die, and I watched memes being formed before my eyes, and just getting an appreciation for how viral content lives and dies by how interesting it is. And then around this time, you would also see like the occasional news report about 4chan was happening. So like talking about the internet hate machine, the hysterical Fox report about the bomb threat that happened in, I think, 2007, I want to say.
So 4chan does kind of have a reputation for some of its members, the people on the site. It's weird to even say members because it's an anonymous board, so it's not like you get like a card. You even have to register an account, right?
Right. I mean, everyone's by default anonymous, and it's very much encouraged that you don't use your real name. And the whole point is this is a place where we can all be as weird as we want to be, however that manifests itself, and have the focus be specifically on the content and not on the person who's providing the content.
So what was the mainstream news like Fox saying about it?
So there was a cyberbullying case, and there have been many since, where a bunch of trolls from 4chan decided they were going to harass somebody, and there was a bomb threat element also mixed in, and
just for spice.
right. And Fox did this like expose on Anonymous, and this was really the first mainstream mention of Anonymous, and it was kind of a silly like 2020 style, do you know what your kids are up to, are your kids safe kind of thing, and it like positioned Anonymous as this merciless group of psychopaths, when in reality it's more likely that they're mostly just sort of kids goofing off and killing time by causing trouble.
And just to keep nailing down this vocabulary, what do you mean when you say anonymous?
As I said, everyone on 4chan is by default anonymous, and they call each other anonymous. And around 2007, Anonymous, up until then had been mostly just trolls and pranksters, and they would mostly hang out on 4chan, but occasionally go outside of the 4chan community and they would harass people on online gaming um, platforms, or like they would go after some dumb white supremacist radio host or like a scam artist, and they just for fun they would harass people and make them look stupid. Around 2007, that all changed when Anonymous decided to start going after the Church of Scientology, and that's when they developed this very political, anti-authority, anti-censorship bent, which had long been a property of the online hacker culture. Anonymous kind of took that on, and they became what I call capital A Anonymous, which is the like guy who wears a Guy Fawkes masks and shows up at Occupy Wall Street. Like that's a very different animal from the troll who's just harassing teen girls on YouTube.
But because Anonymous and just 4chan is this amorphous blob and there's no membership process, is the moral code consistent from member to member or amongst the organization? If organization doesn't even seem like the right word.
It's as inconsistent as can possibly be. I mean, you have this distinction between the early Anonymous and the later Anonymous, and the earlier trolls kind of hate the new ones. I mean, there's a word that they use for them called moral fag, which means that they're basically like internet white knights. They're trying to accomplish something good, and the earlier trolls who are just complete nihilists say this is lame.
And we should mention that the language is obviously very vulgar. We're talking about how the point is to shock themselves, and it's just like become codified at this point. And you talk a lot in the book, and you talk to experts, like, you know, about if it's appropriate to use that language or if it's not. I think that is beyond the scope of the show. So for the purpose of the show, we're just going to throw out the word moral fag and not comment on it.
Yeah, I mean, I could summarize it in one sentence. If
let's just real quick.
Sure, like they use the, you know, this regrettable epithet typically used to identify homosexuals in a negative way, as just a shorthand for someone who likes something a lot. So like they call like people who have, you know, who prefer Nintendo over PlayStation, like, oh, you're a Nintendo fag, or I like Pepsi, I'm a Pepsi fag. You know, it's almost like tossed off without any thought or connection to any kind of slur. But, you know, you're right. Like, I take great pains in the book and spend pages talking about the etymology of it. And I talk to, like, experts at universities who study racial behavior, like race relations online and stuff.
So you were explaining how the older trolls don't like the newer trolls and their moral crusade.
Right. Well, Anonymous basically exploded in popularity when they started going after Scientology. They started getting reports on the news on a regular basis, and all the old trolls are basically like, wait a minute, we're supposed to be the internet hate machine. We're, you know, we don't have any causes. We're not like a political activist group. We're just goofing off. So there's some animosity, and it's not like that ever went away. The trolls are still very active. I mean, a lot of them probably don't even use the name Anonymous anymore because they think it's been corrupted.
By your estimate, how many members of Anonymous are actually effective hackers?
I would say the most liberal estimate would be 5%.
Which is like, what kind of army are we talking about? I mean, you know, I know it's not.
So
like, how many people are we really talking about here?
I describe Anonymous as being a few geniuses surrounded by a legion of cheerleaders, or a few geniuses surrounded by a legion of idiots. Basically, you have a couple people who really know what they're doing, who can pull off some serious hacks. Incidentally, most of those people are now in jail. And you have thousands of people, you know, speaking very loudly about the issues and showing up for protests and causing a stir. And so you have this like megaphone effect where a handful of people are able to generate enough actual attacks in order to support all of the cheerleading that goes on.
And we talked about some of their targets: Scientology, scam artists. In your mind, are these people that deserve it?
I think Scientology is a particularly interesting case because of the way that Anonymous, well, they defanged the church in a way, and I'll explain what I mean. So, in the early days of the internet, there was a group of people who had an anonymous community, and someone posted some internal documents from the Church of Scientology. And basically, the church was like, this will not do. And they got Interpol to confiscate all the hard drives of the guy who was running this community. And it was like that basically the hacker community was just like, this is the worst. We have to stop this. This is our internet. We don't want this kind of censorship. We have to fight this. But the problem was that the Church of Scientology had so much money to pour into their legal arm that they would just sue anyone who would criticize them online, basically. And so what Anonymous did effectively was they overloaded Scientology's ability to sue anyone that's like talking crap, because they can't go after every 14-year-old who's copy pasting sensitive documents that have been leaked. So in my mind, this is one of the most powerful things that Anonymous has been able to accomplish, and it didn't even really require any hacking.
And you talked in the book to the person who probably made, I think, the most famous Anonymous moment, the most iconic Anonymous moment, was when they released that video with the computer doing a voiceover and talking and directly addressing the Church of Scientology. And you talked to the person that made that video in the book.
Yeah.
How did you track him down?
So the guy who made that video is not, he's revealed his identity, and he's appeared on the news, and he lives in Boston.
He's really taking the romance out of it. He lives in Boston.
He actually runs like an SEO company. So he's not this like shadowy mastermind. He's just a random guy that thought, wouldn't it be cool if we went after the Church of Scientology? And something magical just sort of happened where it became a rallying cry for a piece of a generation anyway.
My favorite Anonymous story, I think kind of the one where you feel the most sense of justice was served, is the H.B. Gary tale, which you recount in the book. Can you explain what happened there?
Yeah, I'll try to summarize it, but it's basically there was this guy who was working for a security firm, and he decided he was going to reveal the identities of Anonymous in order to generate a bunch of press for his security company.
And this is a major security company that deals with the NSA, the government, very, very serious, top-level stuff. Right.
And Anonymous was like kind of going viral at the time, so he thought, if I can unmask some of these major players, I'm going to win a bunch of contracts with the government and other security companies. It'll be great for my business. So he decides he's going to infiltrate Anonymous, and basically Anonymous figured it out and hacked into his company's site by tricking one of the employees to hand over the passwords.
His security company's site.
Right. So this is a company that's been tasked with like very sensitive national security data, for instance, and they're duped in the same way that like middle-aged housewives are duped into handing over their Amazon accounts by like Nigerian scammers. So very humiliating, obviously, and it did a couple things. It showed that the security industry probably isn't equipped to cope with some of the real cyber threats that are out there if a bunch of 14-year-olds can make them look so stupid.
But what's interesting about that hack, and it's the same with the Sarah Palin email hack, where her emails were leaked, is it's not a technical thing. Like, you can explain what they did to anyone. You need no computer knowledge to do it. It's more of a social hack, and no amount of computer security or technology can prevent, you know, if you leave the key under the doormat and someone finds the key, like, it doesn't matter how impressive the lock is, kind of.
Right. I mean, the human element is usually the weakest link in the chain. You know, they have all the fancy cryptography in the world, but if they can convince someone into sharing the password, if they can spoof their identity to make people think that they're a coworker or something, yeah, I mean, this is a lot of the hacks that Anonymous is able to pull off, and even like most hacks that are done from credit card thieves and identity thieves that operate out of, say, Eastern Europe. they're using the same kind of tactics.
So the kind of illusion or the fantasy of like the 1994 movie Hackers, where there's someone with a laptop in a payphone booth with just a matrix screen of text flying by, something not necessarily what's going on here.
Right. I mean, that stuff does happen in the world, but yeah, I mean, Anonymous, there was some stuff they pulled off some like SQL injections, which is considered very low level hacking. A lot of it was DDoS, direct denial of service attacks, which is something that you can just download a piece of software and click a button and you're participating in the hack. So it's not, you don't have to be a genius programmer to do it.
So what were we saying before that? I kind of got us off track. You were
So
listing...
I said it revealed two things. The first being how inept the security industry was, not across the board, but just as a case study. And then B was that it turned out this hack revealed that H.B. Gary was putting together a plan to besmirch the name of a journalist who had named Glenn Greenwald, who was pro WikiLeaks, and basically they wanted to tarnish his reputation so that this would basically it was revealed that Bank of America wanted to contract H.B. Gary to ruin the reputation of this critic of Bank of America because he was promoting WikiLeaks. And Anonymous was like, holy crap, we just randomly hacked into this one company and it turns out there's all this corruption. What does this say about the government and about the security and intelligence industries as a whole? It's impossible to know because unless you access every database. But it's definitely that was a case of Anonymous pulling something off that like we kind of owe them. We should be thankful that they did that.
In your mind, was that company asking for it by kind of poking the bear with a stick?
Yeah, I mean, I think he really underestimated their abilities. It's obvious that he thought that he had it in the bag and that he was going to expose these guys, and it turned out not to be the case at all.
And is he around anymore? Is he still like working for the government? What became of this guy?
He is. He's on Twitter. I mean, obviously, a lot of egg on his face.
It's just like, who would hire this guy? Yeah. Like, that is as bad a job as you can possibly do running a security company.
I mean, I wouldn't doubt that he'll be able to find additional work because there are so many people. I mean, the security industry, to a large degree, is based on fear. So you have a lot of people who are worried about groups like Anonymous and how do I keep myself safe? Who better to ask than someone who was victimized himself? Maybe I'm wrong.
Did you talk to anyone while you were researching the book that was on the receiving end of anonymous justice?
I actually did for the second book, Hacking the Future. I talked to a guy who runs a security company in Florida, and they're not quite as closely tied, to my knowledge, with government work as H.B. Gary was. But I mean, this is a brilliant guy. Like he was very frank with me, and he talked me through what had happened. And basically, his mistake, as is the mistake of so many people, was that he was using the same password for multiple email accounts. So Anonymous had hacked a separate security company, revealed a bunch of passwords and email addresses. So they just tried the same password on his Gmail account. It turned out to work. They got into his Gmail, and they were able to seriously disrupt his business for a while. And they wanted to blackmail him and try to get him to send them money, and he didn't do it. But obviously, lessons to be learned, no matter how smart you are in the security industry.
Now, that guy, the people blackmailing him, are not necessarily, as far as we know, the people involved in, for instance, the H.B. Gary thing or any other anonymous activity.
Yeah, like I said before, the ethical framework varies from person to person.
I mean, they could just be two completely different groups of people that we're talking about here.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and this is one thing that frustrates me about the media coverage of Anonymous when I see on the Huffington Post that Anonymous has announced that they're going to bring down Facebook or something like that. I'm thinking, well, okay, so maybe some 13-year-old created a little YouTube video declaring, we are Anonymous, we're going to bring down Facebook. who knows how many people are behind that and whether or not any of them have any skill. So it's I like to call Anonymous a memocracy in that the the operations that they do, their decisions to go after a specific target, operate like memes, and that the ones that are able to achieve virality within the group are the ones that succeed.
Oh, that's so interesting.
So there's no like hierarchy or leadership. There's nobody calling the shots saying like, okay, now we're going to go after so and so. It works just like viral media, and that like these ideas are sort of bubbling up on places. Used to be 4chan. They don't really hang out on 4chan anymore. It's mostly like IRC and other more underground communities. And someone will suggest we should go after this person, and then everyone will shoot it down so it doesn't go anywhere. And then something else happens and everybody gets behind it.
Do you think that memocracy is more or less working for them as an organizational principle?
Well, it has its strengths and weaknesses. Like, obviously, the weakness is that it's very hard to corral people around any single cause. But the strength is that, I mean, they're so flexible. Like, they can do something really quickly, and there's no like paperwork to do, or there's no channel of like approval that they have to go through. If a bunch of people decide like, okay, we're going to do this, they just do it.
You mentioned that the media will often cite a specific video and just doesn't totally understand the organizational structure. What are some other misconceptions about 4chan and Anonymous that are out there?
Well, I guess one misconception about 4chan is that it's all like gross out weirdness. There's actually 40 or so different boards on 4chan, and one of those is called Random. And Random is the one that gets all the attention because it's just completely random content. There's no focus to it whatsoever. So it's an expression of like the extreme fringe of the human imagination. But you also have a thread that's devoted to, say, fitness. So obviously very different culture there. And you have another thread that's devoted to origami, and another that's devoted to photography.
Why wouldn't an origami enthusiast go to origami.org or wherever, these conversations typically take place, free of tentacle porn?
Well, that was a question that I asked a few people. I was also curious about it. And basically what people told me is that they like how fast 4chan moves, and they like its focus on anonymity, so that on a normal message board, people tend to develop cults of personality, especially on boards that reward using some sort of upvote, downvote mechanism. So you wouldn't have like there's no such thing as a 4chan power user, or someone who holds a lot of clout within 4chan, because everyone's anonymous. So it's very democratic in that way. It's very meritocratic in that way. So you're only as good as the last thing you posted, and people only care about you because of what you're posting. So, it not to say that there isn't drama on 4chan, but it enables people to just focus specifically on the thing that they're interested in and not have any sort of politics.
Do you think that's why 4chan is such a good breeding ground for memes? And it is kind of ground zero for almost every major meme that hits the mainstream radar. Is it because it's that insane system where it's so hard to get noticed that if you do get noticed, you must be good? It's such a high bar to clear.
Right. So the average post only lives on the front page for something like 10 seconds, unless it gets replied to. So you have I describe it in the book like a river, and you have people placing like, how little kids will take little newspaper sailboats out into the water.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So imagine a bunch of kids along a river, and they put their boat in the water, and it just immediately starts sailing off down this stream. So that's kind of like what happens when you post on 4chan. As soon as you post it, it just immediately starts moving down the page. Not in real time in front of your eyes, but on the back end. And when someone replies to that, it's like they're taking that newspaper boat and picking it up out of the water, running up to the mouth of the river, and putting it back up front. So I mean, it's kind of a stretch of an analogy, but the idea is that the content is moving so quickly that only the stuff that people are interested in replying to has a chance in hell of getting noticed. I think the anonymity also plays into this in that people are more willing to post stuff that they wouldn't want to be associated with under their real name. So you have just a lot of bizarre um, or just random type of things that don't really have any institutionalized venue for, other than a place like 4chan. Like, if I had some hilarious image that has no context or like anything related to it, I can't just randomly post that somewhere. It doesn't really make sense if it's not a part of the conversation. With 4chan, it's like that kind of thing is invited, where they want you to be as random as possible.
Do you ever post on 4chan yourself?
When I was writing the book, I did. I haven't, to be honest, I haven't really spent much time on 4chan in the last like year and a half since the book came out.
But do you ever go back and just like, let's see what's going on in slash B and just pull it up for a sec?
Yeah, I guess like maybe once a month or once every couple of months I do. Um, the problem with 4chan, I mean, it's the strength and the problem simultaneously, is that it's so time consuming to get to anything interesting. Like I say, there's so much content on the site that you have to wade through piles of stupid garbage that's completely bland and uninteresting in order to get to that one nugget.
But the nuggets are the freshest nuggets online.
That's true. So what I like to do actually is there is a 4chan subreddit on reddit.com, and people will take those nuggets and post them to the 4chan subreddit. So it's kind of a way to skim the cream off the top of 4chan and consume only the choicest interesting stuff.
Now, because Anonymous kind of has this reputation of being rapscallions, were you at all worried that you were poking the bear when you were writing this book?
Yeah, I was, and I knew that they were going to target me to some degree when the book came out, and that turned out to be true. They immediately posted my home address online and tried to quote unquote dox me, which means revealing all my social security, my address, my phone, my family relationships, all that stuff. They didn't get my social or bank account or anything like that. They did get my address and my they were able to find my family on Facebook, and they harassed them. But honestly, it was such a their attention span is usually so short, and unless you're someone who's going to give them like a real emotional payoff, what they wanted was for me to go on YouTube and start crying and beg them to stop, and obviously that's not going to happen. So they lost interest in me pretty quickly.
Should I be worried? I'm putting this up. Are you dragging me into this mess, Cole?
You might get a few like comments, on the site. 4chan is so mainstream at this point, and like everybody's talking about them, especially in regards to Anonymous. That like when my book came out, that it was obviously the first book. Continues to be the only book on 4chan, and so that was kind of a big deal. Now, it's like so mainstream. Everybody has heard of 4chan. It's not a secret anymore.
And your second book deals a lot with anonymity, and it seems like anonymity is part of what makes 4chan work. Is anonymity under threat?
Yeah, it is. I make this case in the book that you have these two directions that the internet is being pulled in. On the one side, you've got corporations like Facebook and Google who are colluding with state actors in order to A, spy, and B, monetize your identity.
And do we know that for sure? Like, we got a smoking gun on that. That's happening.
Well, yeah, I mean, on the cover of Wired a few months back, you have this massive new NSA monitoring facility built out in the desert in Utah that's just dedicated to keeping tabs on what everyone's up to, basically.
So how, and is that via social media, via my Facebook?
I don't know if anybody really knows the ins and outs of it, but I would assume so, yeah.
Oh my God, I feel so bad for the poor FBI agent that has to go through my Twitter feed.
Yeah, I mean, it at sometimes it feels kind of silly because I think about like, well, what I don't have anything to hide, but I mean, the argument that I make is that that's because I am so privileged to live in a place where privacy is valued and where I'm not going to get thrown in jail for expressing some kind of political dissent.
So how is Facebook and or Google specifically colluding with state agents?
Well, I mean, they obviously have to reveal data when they've been subpoenaed, for instance. And any company can. So there's a case going on right now, actually, where Chevron, the massive multinational energy company, has subpoenaed. I don't think it's Facebook. I think it's Google and I want to say Microsoft and Yahoo, but don't quote me on that. Anyway, a couple of big tech companies, and they're saying we want the email and browsing histories of these specific people for the last 9 years because they're involved in the lawsuit and they have to divulge that information. So I mean, there's activist groups like the Electronic Frontier Foundation, for instance, that are trying to fight this kind of stuff. And on the one hand, it seems like kind of silly to worry about privacy because it's like, we live in America, we're safe. But on the other hand, like no one knows what 10 years down the line is going to look like. So that's I like to think of the book as sort of a warning call.
What are you worried about specifically?
Well, um, I worry about just the not being able to speak my mind without having my name attached to it. So we saw this at a very low level with what's been colloquially called the NIM Wars, NYM as in pseudonym. The NIM Wars was a name given to a series of conflicts between Facebook and Google, who were trying to convince their users that they needed to divulge their real names to use their platform. I mean, Facebook does this. Google reneged for Google Plus, and they don't require it. But like if Facebook finds out that you're using a name that's not your own, they will delete your account or ban you or whatever.
But isn't that kind of like a feature of Facebook? I think one of the things people like about it, or what you expect when you go, is that all the pages you visit are going to be real people and they're not going to be for Darth Vader, like they are on Twitter sometimes, or
Right.
what have you.
And that's true, and I like Facebook for that reason. Like I think Facebook should have the right to organize their walled garden as they see fit. I think the problem is when we try to make the whole internet look like Facebook.
Is Facebook's platform, which you see lots of websites asking or requiring you to sign with Facebook, is that a threat? Is that a problem?
I think it's a threat in the sense that it slowly like inoculates us against things that should be more shocking. I don't use Facebook Connect because like I feel like it's bad enough that Facebook tracks everything I do when I'm on Facebook. I don't need them tracking me everywhere else that I go on the web. So I don't do a lot of like sign in with Facebook to leave a comment type stuff. I mean, the examples that I give are, for instance, the quote unquote driver's licenses for the web program, where you have researchers at Microsoft that are saying we needed an authentication wall for the entire internet so that you log in using your real name when you want to get online, just like you would if you wanted to get on Facebook. And everything that you say and do is then traceable back to your real world identity.
And that's Microsoft saying that, or Microsoft's working on that.
Yeah, and politicians and various people and working for certain startups. I mean, obviously a lot of this is driven by good intentions. Like they're trying to limit things like cyber terrorism and child pornography and cyberbullying and illegal data trade and identity theft, and obviously things that everyone would like to see less of. But I think the problem is that we have to look at the internet as something that exists outside of the U.S. And even though it might be okay if everything I say and do online is traceable back to my name because I'm protected by the several amendments, it's not the case in Iran. If you're a gay teenager in Iran and you want to find support online, you're not going to do it under your real name. So I think that it's worth considering that our laws and our policy affect people outside of the U.S.
It seems like it'd be very difficult to implement because I don't know, couldn't I route my internet through Canada?
Yeah, so
It's almost like guns, where like the people that were really going to take advantage of it anyway, they can still get around it, even if we make guns illegal.
right, like I use that metaphor a lot. I think it's even more convincing when you're talking about identity than when you're talking about guns. That if we outlaw anonymity, only bad guys are going to use anonymity. Like they'll figure out a way. This is what hackers do. They break systems and they figure out ways to route around barriers. So, yeah, I mean, I've spoken with hackers, and I'm actually working on a third book right now to dive a little bit deeper into this specific subject called the deep web, which I spent a chapter focusing on for hacking the future, and now I'm working on a whole book about it. Basically, the deep web refers to these anonymous communication channels, such as Tor and Freenet, where you can find things like child porn and guns and drugs and terrorists and hitmen and I I like to think of it kind of like as Mos Eisley from Star Wars. Just this like place where all these creeps are hanging out doing their creepy stuff.
And that is something you can access through traditional internet.
No, you have to. Well, for let's say for instance,
How would I access it very specifically? Give me.
It's easy. I mean, it takes 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Go to Tor.org and download the Tor bundle. Tor is a piece of software that stands for the onion router, which refers to the way that it obfuscates your internet behavior by wrapping it in onion-like layers. And it's not a perfect, foolproof system, but it's what people use to access sites like the Silk Road, which is a growing marketplace for illegal drugs that you can, it's basically eBay for drugs. You can buy from a seller, and there's reputation so that you know you're not going to get ripped off. And then a week later, an envelope full of LSD tablets shows up in your mailbox.
There is no way to ask this without sounding like an old fogey, but do younger people really place less value on their online privacy?
This is a hard question to answer because, on the one hand, you have... So older people tend to be pretty conscious of their privacy because the internet is new to them. So like the idea of someone being able to monitor them is kind of like unsettling. Whereas young people, they're so used to it, it's not necessarily like top of mind.
Is that a bad thing?
Yes, and it's slowly changing though. I would say you have groups like Anonymous, and so earlier I mentioned that the internet was getting pulled in two directions, and I said on one side was Facebook and Google and the government. On the other side, I didn't get to that point yet, is groups like Anonymous, WikiLeaks, Tor, the hacker communities, various activists like the Electronic Frontier Foundation. All of these people are sort of working together to free the information online, and they're seeking different ends. It's not a cohesive group, but the general theme is we don't want the internet to be controlled. We want it to be free and open and uncensored, and we want people to have privacy. So they're making great headway. I think the anti-SOPA PIPA movement of last year was a pretty promising development in getting a bunch of younger people interested in privacy and censorship concerns as it related to copyright content.
But once SOPA kind of became a big deal, it made a lot of headlines, and then the bill didn't pass or didn't become a thing. I don't know how law works. Didn't they just come up with something worse and like sneak that in? And at that point, that one doesn't become a thing.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing this now, and they're starting to there's a resurgence of CISPA is right now. CISPA is similar legislation, and various countries around the world, or the EU has ACTA. All these acronyms are. I would like to see a more cohesive, free the internet movement that doesn't specifically rally around a particular piece of legislation like SOPA PIPA. And there's a couple people that are trying to pull this off, like Alexis Ohanian, one of the founders of Reddit, has an advocacy group that he started, and he's been traveling around the U.S. on a bus trying to build awareness about internet governance issues.
I gotta tell you, Cole, I love the internet, and I plan on using it forever. And you can pry it from my
From your carpal tunnel riddled fingers.
yeah. So what can we do about this? Is there anything we can do about this? Or is it just something we gotta watch happen?
Well, I think that like anonymity has kind of a branding problem where you immediately think of like the stock photo image of the guy wearing an old-timey burglar mask emerging from a computer monitor. Um, like that's not what anonymity looks like. Anonymity is activists. It's comedians who are speaking out against the social establishment. It's transgender people. It's people struggling with their sexuality in some way or another. It's people who are questioning their faith. Like it's anyone that wants to express something, but they want to be able to control who has access to that information. So I think that part of the challenge is to reframe the identity issue and make it more about how do we keep ourselves safe, but rather how do we keep our ability to share information and express ourselves safe. And I think the answer is education rather than regulation. I don't trust the same government that's building massive NSA monitoring facilities in the desert to effectively regulate the internet to maintain my freedom. Um, I think it's more about educating individuals and showing them the value of privacy, and that it's not that I've done nothing wrong, so I have nothing to hide argument is short-sighted and wrong-headed.
Why is that?
Well, I think that part of it neglects to recognize that we don't live in a perfect world, and as such, there are the freedom that you have, being able to say I've done nothing wrong might look different than what someone living in China can say. They might speak out against a dictator, and they feel like they've done nothing wrong, but the society that they live in or the government that they live under feels like they've done something wrong. So, there was a time when you couldn't where people were tarred and feathered for speaking out against slavery, for instance. Even today, the gay rights issue is pretty politicized, and in certain parts of the country, you'd get a black eye in a bar for saying that gay people should have the right to marry, for instance. So, like, I've done nothing wrong, I have nothing to hide. The argument neglects the reality that and it assumes a perfectly progressive world, basically.
I think the reason it's so important to talk about these things is because without free speech, and today that means free speech on the internet, we can't talk about any other issues. So it's at the very bottom. We needed to deal with anything else. And yet, as a political issue, it's still somewhat under the radar.
Yeah. And I feel like the internet is the greatest tool we have for spreading freedom and democracy and progressive social reform, because of the way because people can speak their minds anonymously. That's a new thing in a lot of places in the world. Another problem that I talk about is I call it the permanence problem, where okay, so maybe you've done nothing wrong, so you have nothing to hide, but and maybe you trust the Obama administration, maybe you trust Larry and Sergey at Google, but what about Larry and Sergey's successor and their successor's successor? Like, what's it going to look like 15 years down the line? They still have all this information that they've gathered, and maybe they're not doing anything shady with it right now, but who's to say what the world is going to look like? So I think it's important, like now, while things are safe, and while these issues might look like a lot of like fuss over nothing, I think it's important to consider them while they still are sort of fantasy problems.
I love talking about this stuff. I love hearing about this stuff. I love reading about this stuff. Let's plug your books one more time for those that missed the title. How can others read more about these issues?
Sure. So they're available on Amazon. They're on ebook, audiobook. You can find them in most Barnes and Nobles. I mean, they're books. The first one's called Epic Win for Anonymous, and the second one is called Hacking the Future. You can also just go to Stryker.com and see links to those Amazon pages.
I really enjoyed talking to you. I really enjoyed reading the books. Check them out, everyone. Thanks so much for talking tonight, Cole.
Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate it.
Pretty important issues. Pretty cool dude. I'm glad we got to have that conversation. Thanks again, Cole. The Jeff Rubin Show comes out every Tuesday except the first Tuesday of the month, which means we are off next week. February, pretty short month, but between talking about WWE, getting an MFA in game design, and internet anonymity, I'd say we made the most of it. I feel that way. I hope you do too. So we are off next week. It is the first week of March, but there will, on collegehumor.com, be a new episode of Bleep Bloop. And let me give you a little preview. It's going to be about the Power Rangers. So that's going to be a lot of fun. I will keep you posted on all of those things. You can follow me if you are the NSA and you are interested in any illicit activities I am up to, on Twitter, where I am at Jeff Rubin Show, on Tumblr, where it is jeffrubin.com, on my Facebook fan page, or at youtube.com/Jeff Rubin. Any feedback, or maybe you have a suggestion for a guest for a future episode, you can tweet at me, you can send me a Facebook message, or you can email me, where I am Jeff Rubin at jeffrubinshow.com. Getting a lot of good suggestions lately. I think some of them are going to come to fruition in March. I will call them out when we get there. In the meantime, new Jeff Rubin Show in 2 weeks, new Bleep Bloop next week. I'll see you there.